Thanks, sir. It's really a pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for all the arrangements. I've had very good meetings. Also very efficient. Half-an-hour blocks are really good. Otherwise, academics can talk forever. I think some of you heard some stories about, some parts of my story in Iran, and an eye-opening but tragic story, which when I look back, I'm thankful for the experience, and I think I've come back to academia with some new insights that I like to talk about and share with the fellow researchers, just to make our impact greater in real world. One of the things I've been working for a number of years is Iran's water management. I was a grad student in California, and California water problems are very similar to Iran's problems. And for a long time, a lot of people have been thinking that the problems can be addressed in the same way, and that is probably true, but the way and the situation, the complexities that the country is dealing with make things differently. I also should say, my interest in Iran's water sector is mainly because of my parents. I grew up in a water family, and my parents both work in the water sector, and I was the only child and had to go. I was forced, I would say. I had no choice but going to all field trips and everything with them, and so I had some understanding of Iran's water problems. And after moving to Imperial, I got to do more work on the ground, going to Iran and doing things, having a lot of meetings, learning what the concerns are, having respect for some of those people who are trying but are failing, and then losing respect for some people who are not trying to do things. Was writing a lot about Iran's water problems, talking to media, trying to shape some of the narratives out there. And eventually I got invited to go to Iran and serve. And I think this is something you saw yesterday. This appointment, I think, came on a Sunday, and I think this news was on Monday, and it created a lot of excitement for the Iranians. For the Iranians of my generation, because for the first time the government had approached someone from outside who had no political tie, was known in his field, and invited him to go back and do something. Assuming that environment is not supposed to be political. A lot of people thought, including myself, I thought, doing something good for the country, no matter who's in charge, is always a good thing. It's always a rational thing. And, I did a lot of thinking about it, but eventually I said yes. I got appointed on Sunday, and on Monday it was a lot of excitement. I think Monday afternoon some people started a little bit nagging a little bit, keep the researchers at schools, and this might be some sort of bribing Kaveh Madani so he won't speak anymore. He won't speak out, he won't criticize the system anymore. Tuesday morning there were some news which I was laughing at. I never took them seriously, how a BBC analyst, BBC is an opposition channel in Iran, so BBC analyst is now taking a role in Iran's government, and then a dual national, which is another thing which is not good. I'm not a dual national, but they thought, because I lived long outside, why a dual national would take a role, and so a lot of propaganda started. I flew out of London Tuesday night with wet eyes, thinking about, very excited. I arrived early Wednesday morning in Tehran, and I get arrested. I do a lot of game theory. I've done a lot of policy-related work. I knew there would be complexities. I never, ever thought that I would be arrested right away, because of what was going there at the invitation of the Iranian government. But battle of forces in Iran, internal forces, we have the civilian government elected through election. in the Iranian way. And then we also have some sort of a military government and a shadow government, which are pretty powerful and get their hands everywhere. And I got arrested by them. During the hours I was with them in their detention, going through interrogations, they managed to break into all my devices, go through my accounts and all that. Of course, I'm bothered because it's like violation of privacy if they, that they have access to 14 years of your history and all that. But I thought, okay, I haven't done anything wrong in terms of national security issues, and it's fine, so they have access to it. So I started working, and these pressure, like all these smear campaigns and things were going on. At some point, it was a crackdown on like a group of environmentalists got arrested. One person died. Again, I put into detention again, and again tried to work because I was there to be successful. I was there to create hope. I didn't want to be a bad representative for my generation, and I continued working. But eventually, again, another smear campaign came. They used some of the photos they had from me from like in an AGU meeting, and I was sitting at a table where there were wine glasses on the table, and they used that against me to say I'm not a good Muslim and I'm not supposed to be on that government. So I was on a diplomatic trip and just decided not to go back and resign in exile. It was a sad thing, and there was a strong public reaction. But what can we do now? All I can do is to share my stories and share the things I've learned, and hopefully that will lead to some positive change. One of the things that I've learned is the complexity of water management, and I think one of the most important lessons that I learned is water problems in Iran are not related to the water sector. The causes of water and environmental problems in Iran are not in the water and environmental sector of Iran. They're not even within the agricultural sector, the main cause. And I hope that I can share that story today. Iran is a very diverse country when it comes to its climate and precipitation, temperature, and so on. So people want to. Many people have a very dry picture of Iran, but no, most of the country is dry, but in the north, close to the Caspian Sea, we get a lot of rain, or forest, and so on, and in the middle, there are deserts and not much population, and in the west, mountains and rain, and but most of the country is not getting that much of rain. So to begin with, this country, which is better than I think most countries in the Middle East in terms of water availability, doesn't get that much of water. So most, I think the average precipitation, the long-term average is about 249 millimeters, 250 millimeters, and most of the country receives less than this amount. So you have a few areas that get a lot of rain. So if you look at the percentage of area and percentage of the cumulative precipitation, you can see 50% of the area or let's say 30% is getting 50% of the rain, 30% of the land. So the water is not distributed equally, of course. And temporal variation is also causing another limitation. So about 75% of Iran's water comes off season. So in the season that you don't need it for irrigation. And Iran pretty much has a 4-season climate, and so these two general restrictions, I would say, or conditions, would call for certain actions, and of course Iranians have been in the old days when there were not much going on the ground and surface water was not really accessible in dry areas of Iran. Iranians, the Persians, when the Greeks were, when the Romans invented their aqueduct, Iranians had their qanat systems, under the ground wells and tunnels that they could transfer water to where they were, and for thousands of years that had worked. But the modern Iran, with a higher population, with people all around the country, things are different. Temperature-wise, we are also, so the south toward the Persian Gulf is like hotter and also humid. In these areas which are wet, quite wet, the temperature is also high, so they're humid, a lot of agriculture going on, but you can see that the water demand, of course, would be different based on how much agriculture we have going on. If you look at the long-term water budget of Iran, something that we have been planning based on, the country has been doing its planning based on these numbers. So roughly speaking, what the available freshwater resources of Iran are about 130 billion cubic meters, and then we have some return flows. And that is the number that we have relied on for our planning. And you can see evapotranspiration is quite high. But now that we are seeing problems, we are changing this number. Now, it is, I'm very suspicious of our original numbers, which were there for a long, long time. That could have been wrong estimates. But I'm also very suspicious of the new estimates, because I'm feeling that we're just trying to say we haven't caused the problems that we are seeing. It's just the water budget we miscalculated. But now they're saying we have less than 100 billion cubic meters. Some even say 70 billion cubic meters. And if you had planned for something much bigger than what you have, of course you're facing a situation of water bankruptcy or whatever you want to name it, but you would not be able to satisfy all the demands that you have created. Now, the Iranians are good when it comes to water supply in the urban areas. Most of Iran, I think about 99-point-something% of Iran in urban areas has access to clean tap water, which is exemplary. This is really good for a country in that part of the world. And our tap water has been clean in most areas. Of course, with the increasing population and with changing the sources from surface water to groundwater, the quality, the taste, things would vary, and with increasing pollution, things are different. In rural water supply, we are not as good, but the urban population is about more than 70% of Iran. But in any case, there are regions which are not doing good in rural areas. This is about supply of water, but when it comes to wastewater collection, we are not that good. For a long time, they're not really septic tanks, but drilling wells and let the wastewater go into the wells. And our geology has been helpful in getting things infiltrated and using natural capacity of the nature to clean up the water. But that's not, again, working with very populous cities. So as I said, we have been able to, in this country, to grow, and the country has had a growth. They have done a lot of things, but then things have come at a cost. There are certain improvements, as you heard about, for example, tap water, but there are also signs of an alarming water problem, a situation which could be quite frightening, and some of that you see, some of them you don't. I think one episode, one problem, one thing which has happened in Iran and can be considered, in my opinion, a turning point in Iran's modern environmental history is the shrinkage of Lake Urumia. Lake Urumia is a big wetland. Is one of the largest lakes of the world, and this lake, which used to be a tourist attraction, very beautiful, looks, in the past few years or a decade has looked like this. So we have lost this lake, its ecosystem has been damaged, and then also now we're very worried about the dust particles and salt particles that can be spread around, affect the agricultural lands, health of people, and so on. But why did this cause environmental awareness or environmental discussion? Because it was so big that it was hard to deny this problem. It created a national concern. It was all every Iranian sharing it on social media, talking about it. So it was alerting people, learning that something is happening. But this is pretty much the scene when you go to a lot of other wetlands across the country which don't necessarily get as much attention. Now, when you go under the ground, things are also scary, but what the general public don't see, they don't appreciate. When humans don't see, they don't appreciate. But this one was visible, and that created a lot of anger and momentum in doing something, and the government established a Lake Rumi Restoration Task Force that some of people here have been actually interacting with. It's interesting. Science can beat politics, and people can collaborate and go beyond borders, no matter who's sitting in Tehran and who's sitting in Washington, but in D.C. And then the Restoration Task Force has the mandate of restoring this lake, but it is a very hard task, and you hear more about why this is hard. They have pretty much tried any engineering thing possible. The situation has got better, and we were very lucky this year. I mean, unlucky that we lost a number of people in a big flood, unprecedented floods across the country. The number of people, the death toll was low relatively for the magnitude of flood that we get, fortunately. And then there are some ecosystem restoration, including a better situation for Lake Rumi, but how permanent this situation is, we don't know. And the same thing, and some other wetlands, they got better, but things got worse. Now, speaking of signs, and I said when you go under the ground, the situation can be worse, because now more than 55%, around 60% of Iran's water comes from the groundwater. And as we have got drier and thirstier, we have tapped more into groundwater. So the groundwater across the country, the groundwater level has been dropping and declining, and the quality, there is also quality decline with that. In most places we have, the limit to pump out has been the head of your pump, right? The power of the engine. Otherwise, it's not expensive to pump out water. Agricultural water is pretty much free, and agricultural electricity is heavily subsidized. It used to be almost free, but now it's a bit of more charges. But compared to the revenue that you can make, it's not a big thing. And like every government on earth, Iranians also are struggling with raising the prices and removing the subsidies. So that also is a contributor to the problem. So we keep saying, so we first say we're not giving permits, you cannot pump out anymore. Then it's prohibited, partially prohibited, critically prohibited. So people keep pumping, and we, there are illegal pumpings and so on. And so the situation, of course, in drier areas is worse, and that has cost for the country. For example, the Iranian pistachio, I think our position in the global market has been lost, because that's one dry area which has been heavily hit by the groundwater decline, so that we lose the market to California or Israel and so on. So that also affects that. But now this situation, I think, we have to understand what is causing this, and is this a crisis? When I started writing about this, I also used the term water crisis, and then I faced a philosophical, I think, moment where after seeing some other documents and even a black and white documentary for a long time ago. And I heard the narration there was also saying we are having a water crisis. This was about Iran. I had written an article when I was an undergraduate, also saying water crisis, and then water crisis, and then looking at Iran's media, I hear like everyone is using the word crisis. Now the question for me was like, is this really a crisis? And if it's a crisis, like how long can we have a crisis? And looking around, it's like we are hearing that we have a water crisis, we have an environmental crisis, job crisis, like employment crisis, economic crisis, international crisis, like all these crises which are there, and the public have lost sensitivity to it. But there is also another thing. What is the definition of crisis? What is the definition of crisis? When you say that we are in a crisis, we have hopes for restoring the system. Crisis is an extreme situation in which your efforts, like people get together, they put efforts into restoring the situation, right? Crisis is a situation that you cannot predict when it comes. You know it's possible. You don't know when and where in your system it happens. It's always likely, but you don't know when. But when it happens, all the acts get together to fix this problem, to restore the system to the extent possible. Now, as a water person or like environmental person, now we can ask this question from ourselves: that can we really restore all these systems within a reasonable time frame? And we say crisis, the public lose sensitivity, those acts are not together anymore, and then we have created this hope that we can fix all these problems. But what if we're not? And I think that's the case in most of these things, most of these problems, that the damages are irreversible. That's what we have. Like, if you have a fire crisis, if you have you put efforts to fix the situation, you would have some losses. The episode is over. You look back and you said, we have lost this. We can do better later on. And this is the new situation. And I think in the case of Iran, we also have that a lot of these damages are irreversible and cannot be fixed. And as long as we say crisis, we develop a hope in the wrong way, because this time the hope is that we can fix these problems. So every effort will be put into mitigation. If we have a water shortage, go find new sources of water. Mitigate. There is no adaptation, right? And by the time we realize that these damages are irreversible, we can't really restore the system, the cost of adaptation is huge. Right? So what if we can mix the two things together? And there I wanted to, something that a concept I use that I can introduce here. But so pretty much the situation is the same across the country. Lake Rumi, we have tried a lot, but to fix this completely, a lot of reforms should be made. A lot of changes should be made. Zayan Darud in central Iran, most of the year is dry. You'll hear more about it. Southwest of Iran, we're having dust storms that we never had before. It's just a new problem that we're facing, and it's crazy. When there is a dust episode, we have had a dust episode in which we got power outage because the dust particles sat on the electric grid. Then power outage meant water outage, and we are talking about one humid, hot area. So nexus of all problems, right? And therefore, they're huge, they're intense, and once they happen, people have to move, because it's not water shortage that you can't cope with. Once you see your children cannot, are inhaling that dust, you don't want to stay there. No matter how wet how nice or it looks and what they offer you, what they pay you. There are conflicts around the country over water transfer and water withdrawal. Sinkholes, we didn't have those. Land subsidence, we didn't have those. These are new problems. And tell me that we can fix those within a reasonable time frame. And are we telling people that we can do this? Same thing with, I have a problem, the same problem with the term climate crisis that is being now used. If you believe in mitigation and adaptation, I don't think this is a climate, we're post-crisis. So I think in a situation like this, and, east of Iran, same thing. At the Afghan border, we had Lake Hamoons, which are, I wish were as as important as Lake Rumi for the general public. But then again, dust storms and people who don't lose their jobs, they have to do smuggling, like, get into drugs and so on, because they have no job. So my thing in this situation, I started using the term bankruptcy. And one major reason for that was, water crisis didn't have a clear definition for the people, and people were like interpreting it in different ways. What is causing water crisis? What is why is this happening? How can we fix it? When I started using water bankruptcy, I also got attacked by some people who thought this is too sad, too tragic. By some people who said, oh, he's using this term to deny there is crisis. The Iranians have paid him to shut up. But anyway, bankruptcy is about a failure. We admit that we have failed. So if you have debt, if you have used your credit cards and you cannot pay back, what is the right choice? To go and get another loan, use another credit card with a higher interest rate, or just to file bankruptcy and just stop there, and like tell everyone that you don't have money, you can't afford it, right? Those who make mistake, they owe more and more money. Yes, here you can file bankruptcy and become a president, but in the case of a water shortage, that's a very scary thing. So also to remind people that one of the causes of this is the mismatch between the available water and how much we're using. In this case, same to we have written checks. So surface water, our checking account, we used it. We went to our saving account, our groundwater. Then we start giving blank checks to people, go develop, we can afford it, we'll bring water to this region. And now we have all these demands and we're claiming that 130 billion cubic meter, wait a minute, we made a mistake, it's about 70 or it might be 90 or it might be 100. So we don't have that much water. Now, this is very important because it changes the problem. This narrative reminds people that we have to balance this out, balance it. Now, yes, you can take two approaches, something that the government has been pursuing for a long, long time, and many of us many of the water engineers during the hydraulic mission era were after increasing the water supply at any cost through any sort of technology possible. And normally it's dig wells, make them deeper, then build dams, transfer water, desalinate, recycle, and reuse, and now we want to extract water out of air. But in any case, this is increasing supply. We pay less attention to demand unless we have a situation. So reminding ourselves that we need to restore in cases that we can, but also we need to adapt. Maybe the new Lake Urumia never looks like the old Lake Urumia, but let's settle on something, have a plan, have a reasonable and achievable target and get there, rather than wishing for something that might not happen. Same for other things. We might not be able to restore all our groundwater basins, but things might be possible. But what are the causes? And I think this is also interesting that I should share that my very first papers were about the causes, what causes this, and you hear population, this and that. And when I was going to meetings, I was seeing that things are being rejected. Sometimes when I say population and water shortage are related, there are people who have the ideology of population should grow anyway. And they reject the whole idea of connection between water and population, something that I thought was obvious. There were also a lot of wrong beliefs, for example, that NASA has predicted that Iran would be dry for the next 30 years. Right? Someone had looked at one climate change study, didn't understand how the modeling was done, what the assumptions were, and these narratives were being sold. Or, for example, dams are the cause of Iran water problems and stuff like that. So at some point, instead of talking about solutions and causes, I started debugging and attacking the myths which were out there. Right? I said I cannot get anywhere, but let me at least narrow down narrative, get rid of some of these narratives, and remind people that if NASA had that capacity, they would have done it for California. And it was during the drought. I remember I gave a talk in Tehran and I said, we're California is in the 3rd or 4th year of drought, and people are still debating if next year would be dry or not. So there's no such thing that, like, NASA has predicted that Iran would be dry for the next 3 decades, and NASA is not run by aliens. They're like people who are there, and some of them are our friends who didn't get faculty jobs. But getting into the causes, which are very important to understand. Why? Because you realize that some of these causes, when you talk about them, these causes cannot be addressed by those in charge of water management. And that is why, like, when we can't address them, then it's like, okay, I can't do anything about demand. The only thing I can do is increasing the supply, right? So then the Minister of Energy, for example, in Iran, its role, it's like, by definition, they have to provide water, right? So if there's water shortage, people give them a hard time, they have to go find new sources of water. And it's always easier to build a pipe and dig a canal than going to people and telling them you should save, you should conserve, and I change the prices. Everywhere on earth that's the case. You feel more powerful, and even the public might like you more when you take photographs with big pipes and dams and reservoirs and so on, rather than telling people that some policy reforms, and in the next 50 years you would see the impact. No one would appreciate that. So Iran's population before the revolution was about, like, in 1975, like, 35, 37 million, if I'm not mistaken. 1979, we had the revolution. Within 2 decades, the population of Iran got doubled. My generation, baby boom generation, so with lots of problems, right? So first there were there were not enough milk for us, and then not enough schools, right? They had not enough teachers, and then not enough university positions, like university seats, and later on, not enough jobs for us. So that's why the Iranians are very well educated these days. We have to study. There's no job. And then a lot of, like, problems with marriage, because the distribution of population is changing, and this generation is not very interested in reproducing. Iran is suffering from or not suffering, maybe blessed, I don't know, with a very low population growth rate, which you can say there are improvements in knowledge, education, attributed to more active women, but it's also, like, lack of hope into the future, lack of confidence, not knowing uncertainties, and so on. So have a huge impact on this situation. In any case, I remember, like, some time ago, for a long time, this same slide was being used by the Ministry of Energy, and for 2021, their projection was 100 million. That's a very important point. Whereas, like, when we do the calculations, when we do the plannings, I said it yesterday, that we've planned for the external variables, the external scenarios, and sometimes those things must be internalized, right? So water demand and population growth might even be related to the resources that you have, your economy, and so on. So your population might not get there, and that can be a good thing. You can say there's a limit to growth. But in any case, that results in per capita water availability decline. Iran's per capita water availability, still compared to many other countries, in the region is good, but still, very low compared to the rest of the world. So now the population has grown in number, but as I said, the per capita water availability, that number is manageable if you rely on that index. But the problem of those indices is that you don't see the complexities involved and the dynamics, as we discussed yesterday. But when you look at the population, as I said, 70% of the population are in the urban areas. Where do they live? Mainly in 5 metropolitan in the country. So the population of Tehran is like more than almost like 20% of this population, for example. So we have these huge metropolitans, don't have really medium size and many small size cities, and that's another problem. So the spatial distribution of this population might be much more important and significant than that abstract number. So that is also causing trouble, and of course competition between urban areas and between urban water use and agricultural water use and so on. So, and that causes problems. The second major cause, which is also out of the water sector, is an inefficient agricultural sector. And that is true pretty much for, I think, all countries in the region except for Israel, maybe. And this is a very important thing. Iran has an oil-based economy, and oil has been the source of income. So in the food sector, in the agricultural sector, we've been gambling and subsidizing people to create jobs in the agricultural sector. Of course, we wanted food, and this complex, the food insecurity complex has been something for almost all leaders in that part of the world. They all had this problem. They have money, they have oil, they can build anything, buy anything, but food, at the end of the day, they have to import. And then you have seen crazy initiatives by the Saudis trying to become wheat exporters, by Gaddafi, who wanted to also do a lot of crazy things with water, so to have the world's 8th miracle. So the contribution of the agricultural sector has been declining. That still cannot tell you much, because you can argue that the economy has improved, but it's about 10% now. It used to be around 30%. It covers 10% of the area, land, but most importantly, and this is something that is normally ignored when analyzing the water problems in the Middle East and the developing world, is that it's providing jobs for 20% of the people, and normally these people are poor and low income. This is extremely important. Who are they? They're normally the ones that rely on your subsidies. You can buy your votes. And once you lose their support, you're in trouble. Another thing is, if they lose their jobs and you don't have alternative jobs for them, they migrate to urban areas, revolutions are formed, clashes between the urban population, people living in suburbs, and we have already seen crazy examples of that, for example, in Syria and other places. So that is a very important thing. Now, looking at the tonnage that we get out of, the yield out of irrigated agriculture versus rain-fed agriculture, compare that with the area under these two types of agriculture. The area under cultivation of irrigated agriculture and rain-fed agriculture is almost the same, but the yield is about 10-11% with the rain-fed. So, and wherever you irrigate, you run out of water. That's a rule. So we can do certainly better in our rain-fed agriculture, but not necessarily much better. So it's thirsty, it needs water, and so on. So low irrigation efficiency is a problem. Traditional models, it's highly subsidized, as I said, and compared with the world average, what we're doing is problematic. It means that we're using our water. Now, if you are then inappropriate crop pattern. Of course, this is also a dream, and a lot of academics talk about, we have to change the crop pattern. We have to optimize the crop pattern. What is the optimal crop pattern? How do you define that? And in our mind, it's if this region is water short, you grow this crop, and if that region has, but tell me if that is happening in real world, right? We are importing rice from places where that, for example, a lot of Indians are committing suicide, Indian farmers are committing suicide for lack of water. We import their water, and India, Pakistan, and a lot of places. So the real world, unfortunately, doesn't work that way, and that is another thing. So inappropriate crop pattern is caused by the market. We have a lot of people who farm in areas which don't even have good quality of soil. So the best quality of soil is in north of Iran by the Caspian coast. But that's where we are developing a lot of housing, because it's beautiful, and people buy property. So we're losing our agricultural land, the best agricultural land, to urban development and housing development. Again, that's a market effect, and controlling that is really hard, and farmers are quite happy with selling their land and having a good life. And if you're growing food in areas which don't have good soil, you use more water. So again, our water use for certain crops when you compare them with the world numbers or theoretical numbers, they're way above, which is another problem. Another problem is that what we grow is we care about food security in the country. That's an important thing. Before the revolution, it was the issue of, like, if you see some of the debates or, like, interviews of the Shah of Iran, also when they question him about the rising oil prices, his response is like he's challenging the interviewer about the price of wheat. So that thing has been in the minds of all politicians in that part of the world. So it's a big deal for them. After the revolution, Iran is going through a war, US sanctions, and so on. So being food independent has been, and self-sufficient has been a goal for the system. Now that has come at a cost. Now we're talking about food security rather than food self-sufficiency. Still, we cannot define that, and that's a hard one to define. What system? When do you call your system food secure? And food security, by the definition of food security by the FAO is totally different from the definition of food security when it comes to making decisions in the country by policymakers. So that thing also has been there, and Iranians have been trying to do like 100 wheat production, 100%, for example, wheat production at home, and in some cases, some years they have been successful, in some years they have not been. But what we see, which is striking, is that yes, we are making growth in those areas, but when you compare the growth in cereal production versus, like, for example, summer crops. Iranians are growing a lot of summer crops, and we Iranian farmers, and we're exporting the summer crops to other countries, whereas, like, we have lost our pistachio market, like our saffron market is like, now has competition. So if you're talking about a strategic crop in terms of food security, in terms of having a global share of the market, we're not doing good. And summer crops are good because you can sell them easily, you can export them to the Persian Gulf states or the Arab neighbors. So then you grow cucumbers and tomatoes and watermelon and some of them are okay, but the reason that farmers do that is because they can make money. The problem with that is, though, it's just they get like really penalized by the changes in the market. So they take the price signal, they switch the crop. Next year it's oversupply, the price drops, and so on. Now watermelon is a political crop in Iran. It's wet, chubby, and big. Everyone thinks its water footprint is huge, whereas we have a lot of rain. A big portion of it is coming rain-fed, but people constantly talk about the virtual water export of a watermelon, and they're very, very nervous about watermelons and not knowing that their tomatoes might be taking more water. So as I said, most of the water now comes from groundwater, and the situation there is not good either. Now, the third case, so far the problems have been out of the hands of the water managers, because those who run the food sector are in the Ministry of Agriculture. Ministry of Agriculture is commissioned with making sure the farmers are in a good shape, and then we have enough food. So then the goal is to increase the yield. So if you're a good minister in the agricultural sector, you are after increasing your yield. If you're a good minister in the water sector, you're after decreasing water shortage, right? So then the big decision, and then you have no say when it comes to development, when it comes to building houses in north of Iran, when it comes to population growth policies, where people should live and all that. None of these are in the water sector. So a lot of problems we see in the water sector are byproducts of the problems elsewhere. In terms of dam building, so we then go for structural solution, right? For a long time also, we thought that dams are the solution. We also, being under sanctions, we thought, and I think we developed pride in building more dams on our own. 100% Iranian product. So these are not wells, these are dams. And at some point in our recent history, Iran became among the top three dam builders in the world. And And that came with a lot of pride, but then soon after we realized some of these dams don't get full, and then we created problems like the Lake Rumi and so on. And I think you heard the story of Zayan Route that yesterday I told you about, that through water transfer we also created other problems. So the secondary problems came, right, with reservoirs. We had a recent episode in Iran, so all these reservoirs that we had built, for example, in southwest of Iran, then we get a big flood, a lot of rain, then one struggle one thing which was really problematic was the reservoir operators didn't want to release water because the downstream had lost its natural capacity, because we had some years of drought. Also, we had built a lot of dams. People got closer and closer to the river. The rivers had gone smaller, and now you're dealing with people. And if you want to save that big city down there, you have to kill a few people here. And no one wants to do that. People are afraid of doing that. So how your structural decisions in one sector, your engineering solutions in one sector can create secondary problems. And I think I explained this fix that backfire archetype yesterday. But that has, as I said yesterday, we have got stuck into a crisis management mode to a situation that there is a flood, let's do something about. We have to do more dredging now. More money goes into dredging. There is a drought, let's do this. And we can't really get out of it. To get out of this situation, we really have to reform a lot of sectors. And most of them are not related to water. And as I said, I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is that we cannot, under the current situation, and as we get worse, our economy gets worse with sanctions and so on, we really even lose the chance of creating alternative jobs in other sectors for the farmers. So the farmers migrate to another sector. So we can do more with less water, less resources. Iran can produce more food with less water, less farmers, and less, smaller area under cultivation. But that is not the option. And Iran's social economy, political economy is tied to water, is tied to jobs. And if you're a politician, what are you more afraid of? Environmental degradation or unemployment? Anywhere on earth, I think. Most politicians, vote seekers who are thinking about election cycles care about unemployment and economy, and they don't want to kill people. They don't want to deal with things. Now, another structural solution, engineering solution, which is scary, as I said, it's like everything is reactive, not proactive, is now irrigation efficiency. A lot of money is being put into irrigation efficiency improvement, and then the big question is that really a good idea or not? Because we will most likely even lose our return flow. Now, again, the agricultural ministry wants to increase the yield. They see there's less water. They want to increase the efficiency of use without having plans for reducing the overall use. And that can lead to, even loss of return flow, groundwater recharge, and so on. So inefficient management structure also is hurting us. The system is very hierarchical. The decisions are made in Tehran. We have water authorities, but even with this number of involved sectors and ministries and government agencies, and even a good decision, even a decision which is smart and is made in Tehran cannot be implemented in a proper way. And hierarchies, I think, come with corruption, so Iran is no exception. You have corruption here, you have corruption, and the level of corruption in developing economies, in poor economies, is huge. And then another thing is like other places, this is sad, but we used to have water authorities which were run based on watershed boundaries, but we changed that, and now we have provincial water authorities which don't match the watershed boundaries, and that is causing additional problem. Competitions and conflicts are on the rise. There's not going to be a national water war, but at the lower levels, we are seeing tensions and clashes between cities, between provinces, and that is getting more serious. And now, if you are a policymaker in the developing world, it is, or like in the Middle East, it's best to blame everything on climate change. Because then you can say, this was caused by climate change, I had no role in it, I couldn't have done anything to help it. Right? So then this climatizing like any disaster, anything which is happening is a common trend. And that creates confusion. Whether, are these problems that we're talking about human-induced, locally, or have been caused by climate change? So there are debates, and a lot of researchers, when they get excited, they help this climatization narrative and want to attribute everything to climate change. Climate change has had a role in Iran and to some extent, and things will get worse based on the projections, but to say that everything has been caused by climate change, one example is the Lake Rumi case, that we did a lot of effort, put a lot of effort to change the narrative and say this is a human fault. This is our own fault. So climate change is definitely a catalyst. Extreme events would be catalyst. We also have this situation of political stability, instability, all this, sanctions and all these things. They definitely contribute to the problems. When your economy gets worse, you become more natural resource dependent. You take more resources out and try to survive. You don't think about the future, and that is so. We have a lot of catalysts that are contributing to this problem, but they're not the cause, and it's really, really wrong to sell them that way. The debate over like food security versus water security has also been going on. That is one way to mute and shut people who criticize the water sector management up. You immediately accuse them to wanting to make the country food dependent. And I told you the stories. Like once I was called a water terrorist for saying that we have water problems. I'm making up all these stories. So to convince the government to shut down the agricultural sector, so farmers come to the cities, and then we would have another ISIS. So I'm a water terrorist. I was also called a bioterrorist for trying to make the country food dependent on other countries and jeopardize our food security and import GMOs and destroy the Iranians genetically. So 007, but this is a paranoia, and it's really important. So any narrative should address this concern, and I'm a strong believer of the fact that Iran cannot shut down its agricultural sector at a moment and in the near future. Plus, Iran can improve its agricultural sector and doesn't need to shut it down necessarily. Now, I've written a lot. There are lots of strategies, like most of us. We make a lot of recommendations, and those are in our paper, but I think this is the abstract, like there is the matrix that must be adopted. Iran needs to diversify its economy. Unless it does so, it cannot do anything. So maybe instead of paying so much attention and investing so much money in the water sector and pushing the managers of environment and water and food, we have to do a better job in another sector, and it's about job creation. It's about service industry, expansion of our economy, diversifying our economy, and this is not a water decision. This is not going to be, we have no role in it. Adapt to the new situation. Tell people that we are bankrupt. Tell people that we can't afford it, no matter who's the cause, no matter if it's climate change or us or God or enemy, because they're even talking about cloud theft, that Israel is stealing our clouds and it's not raining. So, and I was joking when there was a flood. I was like, the agent didn't go to office today and we got a lot of rain. But so adapt to the new situation. And then the public awareness element is huge. We have in Iran made a lot of mistakes with, we have told the people there is something wrong. We haven't told them why. We haven't explained the thing. So there are people who say, 90% of the water goes into the agricultural sector, so shut down the agricultural sector, problem solved. 90% of the water goes to the agricultural sector, so what am I going to do? Like by cutting my shower by 1 minute, I have no role, right? And the farmers think that in the urban areas, they don't understand the problem. Then there are people who attribute it to the enemies or to climate change. So anyone has its own reasoning. So because we didn't spend time developing that narrative. And the other thing, which is very important, but also it's scary and can have unintended consequences, is to empower the farmers. In Iran, we have subsidized the farmers, and that has made the farmers poorer over time, right? If you want to really help the farmers, remove the subsidies over time, cut their rights, but give them technologies, help them subsidize the transition, and then create a market. Some people would have to leave this market, but empowered farmers would do a better job. Smart farmers are not reluctant to changes. Now, like the average age of farmers in Iran is very high. Younger people are not willing to go to the field. Farm sizes have got smaller and smaller. People have inherited land from their father and grandpa. So things have got smaller and smaller and more inefficient. So we have to change that. And empowered farmers would do a better job, would get more involved, but empowered farmers would be louder. Now, conspiracy theory. Do you want to keep the farmers intentionally poor to keep your power or not? That's another scary question to ask, and I can ask that. So there is a documentary called Iran's Water Crisis by Al Jazeera that you can watch if you're interested. And there are a few papers I've written that I would be happy if you read them and have questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Questions for Kaveh?
Sure.
Could you speak to how water is allocated, amongst, say, irrigators or municipalities?
So we have water rights, and some of those are very old. Normally, the way we prioritize is that we give urban, industrial, and then agriculture, and then environment. By law, we have to environment should be on top, but in action, environment has no say, right? It has no voice. So environment becomes the last priority, unfortunately. But urban areas would get the first priority. Yes.
In the agricultural department, is the most efficient farmer using the most, the best practices, not the guy who's the largest farm, but the one who's using is they rewarded? Is there any, in other words, or is that not managed really?
I mean, it's like anywhere in most other places in the world. Like rewarded in what sense? There are wealthy farmers in some parts of the country who are good exporters. They act independently. They don't even need any loan from the government, and they're doing pretty well. But pretty much the rest are rely on either predetermined prices that guaranteed buybacks that grow this crop and I buy from you. It's at a very low price at the farm level. By the way, we have a huge amount of food waste in the food supply chain and don't have a good food distribution system like many other places. So not really, so you don't reward them by, if you compare their use and yield compared to others. Of course, you give some gifts and presents or award to the best farmer in one region. Those things happen, but those are not real rewards for making behavioral changes.
In the Rumi situation, how's public attitude changing like that? I mean, at one point they pledged $5 billion. Does that become unrealistic, or are people tiring of it? Or?
No, I mean, that's something that as I said, even though Lake Urumia is, for example, in a Turkish region of the country, it is a national concern. Plus, that region is politically powerful, so it has been high on the public policy agenda. The head of, essentially, the guy who was in practice in charge of the Restoration Task Force then became the head of the Department of Environment, so my boss. So they have been pushing it forward. Now, and people blame the Restoration Task Force for not delivering, and they believe that everything is because of the rain. So all this, better situation is due to better rain. But It is there. The problem is, what can you do? How much more can you do through structural solutions to removing sediment and so now the biggest project is there's a water transfer project. So to bring fresh water from another location and put it into the river. Now the problem is, I think they have hit the limit. They have done any engineering thing possible. And now they're at a point that you're mad at me for groundwater, for Lake Rumi. Do you know you have to cut your use? Like, I'm going to come after you and make sure that you don't irrigate anymore. So it's at a point that they have to go mess and deal with the people and farmers, and no one is willing to do that. So then it's like postponing, and if you're lucky, there's rain, and people, I think, unfortunately, people have, over time, people get used to the new scene, right? So that's also a little bit of water. When it gets really bad, then you talk more about it, you allocate a little bit, you release some water, you go fight, and then there. But if it looks a little bit good, then the Ministry of Energy is not releasing water. They keep the water behind the reservoir. Even we will have the maddest parliament member who's attacking the government for drying up the lake, putting pressure at the same time, putting pressure on the Minister of Energy for not releasing water and keeping water in the dam for summer, right? So even, these sorts of things going on. So it's all conflict of interest, and then can you mess with the farmers? Can you go after the farmers? Can you go, tell people to use less? And I don't think. So it's a governance issue, like purely governance issue at this point, I think.
One of the Rumi questions, and you mentioned some of these structural changes. Some of the things I've heard sound like there's been, and I'm not sure about this, so I could well have it wrong, but some pretty severe environmental damage by channelization of the river just to get water to the lake, drying of wetlands around the margin to get water to the main lake. So
there are things. You have to really verify those by going there. But of course, any sort of thing like that has impacts, right? If you're doing dredging or like you're merging two rivers, right? So, but then this is where the public attention matters. But right now, the environmentalists might understand those things, the locals might understand those things, but for a person sitting in Tehran, the state of Lake Rumi on that, satellite image is more important. So the government can celebrate the progress at that terminal point. So what happens upstream, you don't report it. Same thing with still groundwater connection to this system is being the narratives out there are that there's no connection between groundwater and the lake, and they're not doing much on groundwater control because people don't see the connection and it's not visible, and you don't want to mess with the farmers.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Kaveh.
Thank you.